Hi everyone, welcome to my channel. I'm Shayne, I write romance and romantic fiction, and today I'm doing my end of summer wrap up. We're going to talk about some of my favorite romance and romantic books that I read this summer. Okay, let's get right into it. First off, in June, I finished Can't Get Enough, which is the third and final book in the Skyland series by Kennedy Ryan. I actually finished it on the summer solstice. It's a very vivid memory for me. I sat at my kitchen table, that long summer light coming in the kitchen window, had a little glass of wine, finished this book. It was my favorite book of the series. I did a short mini review on it where I talked about that because a lot of booktubers that I watch said that the second book in the series was their favorite. And I love the second book as well. But I don't know, there was just something about Hendrix's story and the whole thing that just really struck for me. I think I really enjoyed that Hendrix has this sort of glamorous life that she created for herself. So there was a little bit of, I guess, vicarious living. Like, I like one of the things that's fun about reading, billionaire books is that you sort of get to live vicariously this really fun and glamorous life. But in this case, Hendrix was the one who was providing that for herself, and that was really fun to see. I also enjoyed how much time we got to spend with her, like in her career, at her workplace, in her element. And her career was a huge part of the story and a huge part of the conflict. And the sort of great dynamic in this particular book is that she really met her match. She's somebody who was very independent. She was kind of the one in the friend group that always was there to help her friends out and always was there with like a lighthearted attitude or a wisecrack or whatever. And in this story, you get to see that she's really struggling because she is caring for an aging parent, which is something that most of us probably have to deal with at some point or another. I had to deal with it, and a lot of the stuff that Hendrix went through in that journey was familiar, and it was a little apprehensive because I knew that was part of the storyline and I wasn't sure if I was ready for it, but I'm like, I kind of have to be ready for it because I really want to finish the series. And in some ways it was cathartic to see another character going through a lot of the stuff that I went through, particularly the guilt. I don't know what it is, but there's something about caring for and loving like the person who took care of you, and the sort of sadness of watching them decline and suffer, and there's this kind of feeling like I should be able to do something. And oftentimes you can't do a whole lot, or there's only so much you can do, and she struggled with that with her mom, particularly with also the other burden of having a very high-powered, high-end career that she loved and that she started from the ground up herself. She was sort of the head of the whole thing, and she had to keep her career going. And balancing that and trying to also balance downtime, and then being there for her mom and being there for her aunt who was taking care of her as well. That was a lot, and I enjoyed, it was comforting in a way and like empowering to see somebody else going through that and struggling with that. And then with Maverick, the love interest, he was somebody who came on really strong, and because she had a lot going on, and also there was a forbidden aspect to their relationship. Now, I think that some people had a real issue with the forbidden nature of that relationship, but I just thought it was like, well, this is real life, sometimes life is messy, but it was so clear that he was a really good match for her, because he as well, was very well off, and they really had aligned visions as far as wanting to give back to the community, and they thought about a lot of the same things when it comes to social justice and uplifting other Black people and Black entrepreneurs and athletes and just others who are trying to make it in this world as well. So that was really cool to see that alignment. And also, he knew how to be there for her as a partner, not as somebody who has to like rescue somebody, but who just has to be there and be a support system and show up. Sometimes, and this part always gets me emotional, but sometimes it's just the showing up that is all that's needed. And there was this one scene where where Hendrix was really having a really, really difficult and emotional and challenging event. And she told him about it. And of course, she's like, I'm going to be fine. Everything's going to be okay. I know that. And he's like, she didn't even have to ask. He showed up for her when she needed it. And it was an amazing moment that, I got really emotional about. And it was kind of that moment where you're like, yeah, this is the right person for her. So that is Can't Get Enough, the final book in the Skyline series by Kennedy Ryan. All right, next on my list anyway is Thornhedge by T. Kingfisher. Now, T. Kingfisher is a fantasy author, and I don't read a whole lot of fantasy anymore. I did a lot like a few years ago, but I kind of just fell out of that genre for whatever reason. But I hear a lot of other book lovers raving about T. Kingfisher on their channels. And one particular booktuber, I will link her channel down below. Her name is Shayne Monroe, and she actually focuses on horror and spooky books, which I like some. I do like some horror, and I definitely like spooky stuff. I love Halloween and gothic books and all of that. And she mentioned Thornhedge as being one of her favorite books that she read in 2024. It's a novella. It's a fairy tale retelling. Now, I do love fairy tale retellings. And so that hooked me. And then just the way she talked about how the author sort of twisted the narrative. It's basically a retelling of Sleeping Beauty, or in Grimm's fairy tales, I think it's called Briar Rose. So it's a retelling of that. And I just remember I spent a Saturday saying, yeah, let me check this book out. It was available from the library. I'm like, let me see what this is about. And I'm trying to see if I can remember if they have some of the names. Yes. So we have it basically. So here is the tagline. There's a princess trapped in a tower. This isn't her story. Meet Toadling. So Toadling is our main character in this one. Oh my God, she's such a precious protagonist. And then there is a knight named, I think his name was Halim. And the retelling is basically a twist on the whole Sleeping Beauty myth. It's primal. She really gets into a lot of really like from the earth folk tales from this region, England. And it's dark and earthy and primal, and also at the same time very mystical and whimsical. And you're just like, oh, how is she going to twist this part of the fairy tale? How is she going to twist this? And then there is a romance in the story that kind of sneaks up on you and then hits you over the head because it's so good. Okay, story time. I remember when I was in kindergarten, the teachers had this like little contest where you could win some sort of prize. And one of the girls in my class won the prize. And when her name was announced, she burst into tears. And I remember being like, oh my gosh, what is wrong? Why is she so upset? And somebody, I think the teacher said, she's crying because she's so happy. And I was like, well, that's the wildest thing I've ever heard. Why would you cry when you're happy? That is what happened to me when I finished reading Thornhedge. When I got to the end of the book, I just burst into tears because it was so perfect and so sweet. And then there was an epilogue. I'm not usually the hugest fan of epilogues. A lot of times I feel like epilogues just kind of drag the story out, and you could have just ended it at the ending and let our imagination figure out the happiness that comes after. But in this case, the epilogue really added to the story, and it too made me cry because it was so beautiful. So then I was like, okay, I think I might be getting a clue as to why so many people love this author. So more to come on T. Kingfisher, but that is Thornhedge by T. Kingfisher, a novella that is a fairy tale retelling of Sleeping Beauty / Briar Rose. All right, next. Okay, Burn It All Down. Got this book from the library. I remember reading about this book in 2021 when it came out and thinking, oh my gosh, that premise sounds amazing. So want to read it. And then things happened and I didn't. It finally became available from the library, apparently because of a trust. There's a local trust here. I see a lot of books from the library that have the sticker on it, generously donated by Richard A. Friedman Trust. And I'm wondering if the trust has specifically said, books by marginalized folks need to be given to the library, because I feel like every time there's a book that's like by a Black author or featuring people of color or featuring LGBTQ plus people, that it has been generously donated by this trust. So thank you to the Richard A. Friedman Trust. Let me just read this tagline for Burn It All Down by Nicolas DiDomizio. A buddy comedy revenge novel starring a mother-son duo with a shared weakness for toxic men, red flags, and bad decisions. Perfect. So the premise of this story is that this 18-year-old aspiring comic, Joey Rossi, he is about to he's about to go on spring break, and he discovers that his college boyfriend has been cheating on him, and he is just devastated. And he's like, commiserating to his mom. So this character is very close with her mom. Think Gilmore Girls, like that kind of closeness. And he's like commiserating to his mom, and he's like, hey, remember that time that we went and I forget what they did exactly, but they went and did some, shall we say, some like Jasmine Sullivan type bust the windows at your car. We're talking maybe some Angela Bassett walking away from her cheating husband's car as it goes up in flames. That kind of action. He's like, hey, remember when we did that to your ex-husband's place? And his mom's like, nope, we're going to be cool. We're going to be civilized. We're not doing that kind of stuff anymore. Well, then his mom's boyfriend breaks up with her. So then the two of them, so now we got two people who are feeling a little in their feelings. And so one wine-fueled night, they decide, yeah, we're just gonna go. Beyonce in her yellow dress with a baseball bat, hold up on these mofos. So you have to be on board with that premise to enjoy this story. It was hilarious. So basically things get out of control and they have to go on the run because they are not hardened criminals and really don't know what to do. And the story goes on from there. This is it's fun, it's hilarious. Also, I have been noticing a lot of synchronicities happening in my reading lately. And I just wanted to give you an idea of like kind of what you're gonna get into with this story, with this, a teenager basically who is, has to learn, like all of us have to eventually learn to deal with rejection and heartbreak, and also sort of maybe think about what types of partners we pick, because he realizes that him and his mom kind of have the same bad pattern and maybe they need to break that. But I was listening to Nicole Byer's podcast, Why Won't You Date Me? And in one of the recent episodes, she interviews Monica Lewinsky. I think it was for her 400th episode. It was a special episode. She interviews Monica Lewinsky. And there was this part in the podcast where Monica Lewinsky talks about how surreal it is to have her name come up like in pop culture. Like she's a Jeopardy question. Her name is mentioned in like, I think well over 150 rap songs by now. And she comes up in movies and books, and she talked about how surreal that is and how she kind of had to develop a thick skin because she could just be boop, 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 sitting in the movie theater or reading a book or having a friend call up and say, hey, your name was mentioned. Well, a week after I listened to that podcast, I started this book, and like on page 2, Monica Lewinsky's name is mentioned in a good way. So that was when I knew that I was going to like this book, because she's basically like this main character's hero, which is hilarious. Anyway, this was just fun and funny, and really delves into, it's very much a mother-son story, and also a story about learning to make better choices and take accountability for your actions. So that is Burn It All Down by Nicolas DiDomizio. I think that's how you say the name. It's Italian. So that is that. And then next, A Sorceress Comes to Call, also by T. Kingfisher. Because like I said, when I finished Thornhedge, I was like, I want to check out some more books by this author. So the next one that came up from the library was another fairy tale retelling. This one was a retelling of The Goose Girl, which, by the way, The Goose Girl, I reread it before reading the book because I wanted to refamiliarize myself with the fairy tale. It is really dark, as most fairy tales are actually, but I was really curious to see how she would sort of retell that one. And gosh, I am just really fascinated by how she decides to twist the familiar tropes and events. So when A Sorceress Comes to Call, the protagonist is Cordelia, and she is a 14-year-old young woman who is the daughter of a sorceress. And this particular sorceress is basically an abusive parent. So Cordelia, so that's just like a trigger warning. Cordelia is an abused child in this story, and she is trying to figure out a way to sort of escape her mother and or keep her mother from harming other people. So one day her mother comes and tells her, we are going to go on this trip, and because her mother is always looking, has two goals in mind. One is to make sure that she can always have a sponsor, shall we say, a sponsor meaning a rich man to foot her financially. But she also wants to make sure that her daughter gets married and set up properly. And she also was always warning her daughter to not fall in love, because men will just use you, but you just need to get somebody who's rich so that you'll be taken care of. So one day, Cordelia's mother comes and says, I found us a situation, and they pack up and leave and go to visit this like lord or duke or somebody who has like some money in this town. Well, the man that Cordelia's mother has her sights set on lives with his sister. And his sister is what would be considered a spinster. She's later on in her years, she's never married, and basically the reason she never married is because she didn't want to lose her independence, because this is back in the time when getting married for women meant losing your own sort of autonomy. And her name is Hester, and you just fall in love with her immediately. I am really envious of how T. Kingfisher makes you just fall in love with your characters, like on this really like almost, you don't even see it coming, you're just like in it with them. She doesn't like, half a page or maybe even the first few sentences. Loved Hester. Hester is an amazing heroine. So the story is told between Cordelia, the abused daughter who's trying to figure out her way out of this awful situation with her mother. And then on the other hand, you have Hester, the sister of the man that the sorceress has her sights set on. And Hester knows something's wrong. She knows that, number one, her brother might be in danger, and also that her whole situation might get messed up, because nothing messes up your situation than somebody else coming in and saying, and taking over the household. So Hester and Cordelia are kind of both almost equal protagonists although Hester is definitely a huge driver of the story because she's an adult and she knows something's wrong, but doesn't know what exactly, or even what she's up against, which creates great suspense and tension. The other thing that is great about Hester is that she is an older heroine, and she is also disabled. She has a really bad knee, so she's always in pain and has to walk with a cane, and she's always trying to hide that she's in a lot of pain and hide that she needs help walking, which is fun to see. And there is a romantic interest in this story, which is delightful. And the other interesting thing, another synchronicity, is that so Hester is always very aware of the fact, particularly in this, in the society that she's in, she's always thinking about the fact that she's old, and always thinking about the fact that, no man is going to want her. Men are always going to want somebody much younger. Men aren't going to want to be seen with her because she's older. It doesn't matter that the man might be the exact same age as her. She's just always thinking about that. And that was interesting to me for a couple reasons. One, because it really does play in a very realistic way with the whole fairy tale device of maid and mother crone, with Hester being in the crone category. But also, it's still very, very true to this day. Back to Monica Lewinsky. So Monica Lewinsky has her own podcast, which I checked out after hearing her on Nicole Byers' podcast. And there's an interview that I listened to where she talks with Brooke Shields. And Brooke Shields is 60 now. At the time that she did the interview, she was 58. This is Brooke Shields, like the famous model actress, in my opinion, one of the most gorgeous women out there. And she was telling the story because she was basically talking about how, when you're a model, when you're an actress, when you're a woman who is known for her beauty, you're not supposed to ever age. And if you do, they're going to come for you. And she was telling the story about how she was at a party or some sort of event or function, and she was talking with this man who was roughly the same age as her. And they were kind of, having a little flirty conversation. And then she made a comment that revealed that about what her age is. And she said he just immediately shut down. The flirtatious vibes ended, and he almost looked like he was embarrassed or even a little repelled about the fact that he'd been flirting with somebody that old. And I'm like, this is Brooke Shields, dude. Really? Even her can't escape sort of the misogynistic ageism that still runs through our society. And I thought about that when I was reading about Hester, because Hester had the same kind of mindset, because that's just how, unfortunately, things still are. Anyway, I really loved also Sorceress Comes to Call. Also dark, it's a perfect blend of dark and subverting the fairy tale, but also funny, like the humor. All the characters are fully fleshed out, and they all have their own personalities. So you get to see all the different characters and all their different little quirks, but also how they all interact with each other. And this is a story where you have a lot of different characters who are trying to survive and do the best they can against this one very powerful evil force. And that was also just a great time. Love that story. I'm going to be checking out more books by this author. So that is A Sorceress Comes to Call by T. Kingfisher. And finally, last but not least, I read Emily Henry's Great Big Beautiful Life. I'm a huge Emily Henry fan. I have now read all of her books. I'm so excited to actually have done the whole backlist. This is her latest book. It came out in April. I said I knew when it came out I was going to wait till summertime to read it. And I loved it. I absolutely loved it. I remember when she first came out with Beach Read. One or two book reviewers like New York Times, etc., commented on how her story was sort of a blend of romance and women's fiction. I mean, I think her books are solidly romance, but she does bring in a lot of other subplots and a lot of other types of love and types of romance in all of her books. And I think of all of them, if you were going to make an argument that she's a blend of romance and women's fiction, this is the most like that, because there is a lot in here So the setup with this story, this is Rivals to Lovers. And the setup is that we have two writers, Alice Scott, who is kind of a celebrity profiler. And then you have Hayden Anderson, who was like a Pulitzer Prize winning biographer / Rolling Stone writer. And the two of them end up competing to write the biography of this celebrity who disappeared kind of at the height of her fame. She disappeared, and she's now finally that she's kind of coming to the end of, you know, the last third of her life, shall we say. She's finally decided that she might want to tell her story, and basically sets these two up to pitch her as to who would be the best one to write the story. So you have that is the conflict, and of course they are opposites. She is sunshine, he is grumpy, and they're in this small town because that's where the celebrity Margaret, her name's Margaret, that's where the celebrity kind of escaped to this small little town in Georgia. So they're always running into each other because they're always getting out of their like hotel room or Airbnb to get out of the house and write. So they're always running into each other, and they start developing a bond, but they're also competing for the same job, which they both want very badly. So you have that set up. So you have the story of them and what's going on with them. And then you also have the story of Margaret, who is like the daughter heiress of a media giant. And you have the story of her and her family. So there's really two stories going on, and it's about how, as Alice learns more and more about Margaret, then you can kind of see how what she's learning is tying into her own life and her own relationship with her family. And I enjoyed both stories. Usually, a lot of times there's one story, when you have like kind of a two-story device going on, oftentimes there's one that you enjoy more than the other, and I enjoyed both. I enjoyed both storylines. I loved hearing about Margaret's great-grandfather and how the whole empire got started and all of the secrets and all of the resentments and misunderstandings. And at the end of it, this is a book that's really about the different ways that people love and then deal with losing love. When this book came out and Emily Henry was doing like an interview circuit, I signed up for one that she was doing through Barnes & Noble, and she talked about that a lot and that is, I think, a theme that you will see in her books is love and grief. And that's something that she actually, when she was writing this, she was going through the loss of her dog, and how even that impacted her mindset when she was writing the book. And I think that's another thing I love so much about her writing, is that love in all its forms are equally important. And her books are not dark at all. Her books are very light and sunny and witty and optimistic, but she does deal with things that all of us deal with, which is losing love, losing someone, being disappointed, having misunderstandings where you feel like you just can't communicate or you can't ever get the approval of somebody. And so that to me was a lot of stuff was coming up when I was reading this book that's about love in all its forms. And the other funny thing was that I was also, at the same time that I was reading this book, I was also reading an article in the New Yorker, and I'll try to put a link to that below as well. I was reading an article in the New Yorker, also available from the library, by the way. Please check out, if you don't already, check out your library's resources, because I'm like reading all of these articles from magazines that would normally be really expensive or I wouldn't be able to have access to because they're behind a paywall. New Yorker had an article about James Baldwin because a new biography of him has just come out. I think it's called Baldwin: A Love Story, and the biographer is really focusing on James Baldwin's love life and how that played into his worldview, his writing, his politics, and everything. And now I wish I could remember the quote. I meant to have it with me, but there was this part in the review that talked about how Baldwin's themes, even though James Baldwin is known, of course, for having a lot to say, a lot of really smart and profound things to say about race relations and the state of Black people in the United States. really, when it really comes down to is in his themes of his books, is how we can't, about how hard it is for us to love each other, because in order to love each other, we have to be vulnerable, and nobody likes being vulnerable. And I really was thinking about that when I was reading this book. And it just made me think about how love really is. This sounds so cliche and so trite, but it made me realize in a very profound and sort of almost like great big beautiful way how love is so much a part of the human experience, and yet at the same time it is so freaking hard to do. And hopefully when we read books that are about love and about how people learn to overcome disappointment and overcome loss and go for things even though they've been hurt, and go for something even though it's hard, that we can all be inspired as well to go for what we love in life. So that was Great Big Beautiful Life by Emily Henry, and the last and final book in my wrap-up for the end of summer. So that is it for my summer reading. I hope you enjoyed this video. Next week, we'll be getting into the fall season. Pretty much that first week of September means it's time to gear up for fall, and we'll be talking about some fall books. All right, until next time, we'll see ya. Bye.